Hey, so perhaps you've seen it already. There is an event happening this month on the bookish side of YouTube called March on the Rails, where people are reading literature about trains and featuring trains, anything to do with trains. It is co-hosted by several people, among them Andrea from the channel Infinite Text, and I'll link all the other people down below. And this really captured my imagination, and I really wanted to contribute. So I asked myself, what books about trains or that feature trains prominently have I read that I could recommend in a recommendation video? So I made a list and went through it, and a little problem presented itself. Knowing me, you probably already know what it is. So there is the novel Pieces by Helen Oyeyemi, spelled Peaces, which is a piece of weird fiction that takes place entirely on a train. But is it a real train? This thing has, from the get-go, an extremely annoying MFA feel to it, and it reads like the literary equivalent of the kind of art history student who puts on two mismatched socks and thinks it makes her oh so special. And then there is the Dark Tower series by Stephen King, which in at least one, maybe two volumes features a character which is an extremely frightening monorail train. I would never recommend the Dark Tower series. I think it is an extremely unfortunate example of what happens when you don't plan your fantasy series out before you start writing them. And then I once read this memoir, or I read about a third of a memoir called Railway Man by this Scottish man, Eric Lomax, who was taken prisoner of war by the Japanese in World War II and had to work on the Burmese railway. This is a super interesting topic, but unfortunately, I don't know what the problem was, whether it was that Eric Lomax was done dirty by his ghostwriter, or if he just didn't give the ghostwriter much to work with. This whole thing, it feels like it was written without a clear concept in mind, and the level of reflection was not exactly very high. And then I recently read Vladimir Nabokov's debut novel Mary, which takes place in a boarding house in Berlin in 1924, which is full of Russian expats. And the house sits very close to some railway tracks, and the constant sound and the vibrations of the passing trains makes it feel as if the house itself is a train and is running on the railway tracks, which is extremely fitting because all the boarders in the house are perpetually in transit and living transitory lives. Can you tell that this is a debut novel yet? A book about a very special kind of train that I would like to read is Inverted World by Christopher Priest, a science fiction classic about a space colony that for some reason sits on railway tracks and has to be constantly on the move. I suppose it has something to do with gravity, but I'm not sure. I don't know much more about this book than what I have just said. And then, of course, there is more than one classic and popular Agatha Christie mystery that has to do with trains, but you hardly need me to recommend those to you and to bring those to your attention. So what I thought I'd do instead of making a recommendation video is to read a new to me train book and then review it and ideally recommend it to you. And naturally, what ended up happening is that I picked the exactly wrong book. I picked The Great Train Robbery by Michael Crichton, which it so happens I already had a copy of that I bought sometime last August. It was a very cheap second-hand copy, and thank God it was. So this is a piece of fiction that takes its inspiration from an actual heist, the Great Train Robbery of 1855 in southern England, where a gold transport was robbed. But the book then, or the author writes a fictional story around this true event. However, although the fictional elements by far outweigh what is known about this event and its preparation, its execution, what happened behind the scenes during the trial, the story is told like in cold blood. At the very first, I was intrigued by this. I thought it was a very original idea. However, it got stale very quickly because Crichton takes this as an opportunity not only to teach his readers about this train heist, but also about Victorian society in general and Victorian London in particular. And we get great info dumps about Victorian London. And all those contain information that is really only new to you if you've never so much as read anything set in Victorian London or in Victorian times in general, if you've never touched a Victorian classic in your life before, if you've never even watched a period drama set in Victorian times. No Christmas Carol, no halfway realistic Sherlock Holmes adaptation, nothing. In that case, yes, those info dumps might be helpful to set the scene for you for the action. But if you've read or watched any of those, then the info dumps quickly get tedious, and so do the cardboard characters. And what also gets tedious is the weird slang that Crichton writes. It feels completely unnatural, completely robotic. And then there's this thing that he sometimes uses American terms, probably without realizing it. So he uses first floor and second floor, where I guess the correct terms would be ground floor and first floor. And this might seem like a minor thing, but it just breaks the illusion, especially when he's writing from the perspective of one of the very British characters. So I tortured myself with about 60 pages of this, and then I gave up. I was so fed up, I couldn't read a single page more, and I came here to warn you about it. Of course, everything that I've just said might make this book sound incredibly exciting to you, in which case, enjoy. But I'm sure there are at least a couple of people out there who will appreciate these words of warning. So, true to form, this is my negative contribution to March on the Rails. Let's just hope that the next event takes us on a more positive journey. I'll see you soon, guys. Thank you for watching as always. Bye.